Welcome, Olga. Great to have you here, and we are sitting here with a nice group. Unfortunately, I cannot turn the camera, so you cannot see all the friendly faces that are around here. But hopefully you keep them in your mind as you present your talk. And if there are questions, there's a microphone here. People can speak in the microphone if they have a question they want to put to you. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to this session on the impact of prenatal or birth trauma across the lifespan. This is going to be a little bit different from other perspectives. So you had the opportunity to attend in previous training schools, because what we are going to look at is from the perspective of the prenate and then born baby and growing up. The agenda for the day is this. We'll start with the different types of trauma. Then we will see how it affects the agents, the prenate, the family, and the society. Then we will focus a little bit better on the maternal-paternal stress and how it affects the social life, social health, and psychosomatic health of the children, and then how this transfers to the next generations. And we will conclude with some ideas as how we can support the healing. So in brief, or to put the highlights, prenatal and birth trauma embraces all gestated and born, we are among them, parents and society. The theme does not restrict only to mothers, but fathers are important. The unborn child is a sentient being, and there are longer than 100 years that psychoanalysis pioneers have been speaking about it, and current research provides evidence. You can see here a selection of books already published. The primal trauma, as we call it, has faced and is still facing a lot of resistance. However, the primal trauma resistance serves nobody. Today, in our nowadays, we also have further challenges because of the technological interventions and the artificial intelligence, and these all sound an alert bell, and it is high time to recognize, study, and provide compassionate healing solutions. Most of the times I start speaking to people I meet in my clinic, and I ask them, was there anything going on around the time of the gestation, birth? And they usually may say, no, not really, because actually all of these traumas, the different traumas which we will present in a minute, are integrated, and so they seem normal and not making any difference. So when we speak about the pre-perinatal trauma, we speak about the trauma that is we are exposed during the period from before conception, because we have the ovulation period, the gametes, and all the other traumas that follow below, and the birth during gestation, birth, preconception, conception, gestation, and the birth. Now, in the meaning of trauma, the trauma can be either real or imagined, an imagined phenomenon, not because of the reality of the harm that was inflicted, or the sadness which may make it fall into the category of a shock, but because these experiences are believed to have harmful influences on the identity, as Alexander said. So it is not only an event, a real event that causes a trauma, but also an event which is perceived as traumatic. So that's why we thought in the trigger, the period, we examine the period before, during, and after, and it could be either an acute trauma, single experience, or chronic, repeated and prolonged, or complex, because it has multiple traumatic events happening at the same time. No matter what it is, this pre-perinatal trauma, or trauma generally, is part of our everyday experience. The personal trauma is something that refers to each one of us. So there is no restriction in time. It can happen anytime during our lifetime, from preconception to our death. And you can see that we also have the ancestral, the vicarious, social, modern technology trauma, collective, historical, intergenerational, and transgenerational trauma. Speaking about the ancestral trauma, what we mean by that is the trauma that is passed down through generations within families, which means that examples are sons murdering, fathers suicides, infertility issues, mental disease, physical health challenges, accidents, violent behavior, addictions, exile, poverty, grief and loss, all of these things. And most of the times, or until recently, they were thought of as curses, as punishment sent by God, and there were and still are rituals and offerings to keep the ancestors pleased. So why it is important to take it into account? Modern psychotherapy needs to go back and analyze the ancestral legacy in order to understand what is going on in the life of our client. The social trauma now may be caused by three different types of the failures of the social system to provide support to the citizens. And it could be either, as you can see here, when the social system fails to contain, protect, provide aid and compassion to victims of poverty, disease, natural catastrophes, social upheavals, economic crises, or wars. We can recognize that all these are present-day situations. Or second is when it fails to protect the individuals in cases of undisputed attack on a certain subpopulation, Roma, for example, or on the majority of the population, like in cases of social repression, racism, genocide, purges, etc. And the third is when the system publicly says, yes, I support, but in the background puts a brake on current social values and laws, as the cases in the cases of corruption, fraud, and lying, and we can recognize all of them in our experience. So what is the social trauma causes? Is that it brings the people into mistrust of other people or systems. They see society as a threat. They develop a kind of social phobia, and we recognize or diagnose social anxiety disorder. What is integrated on our psyche is humiliation, rejection, and rejection is one of the worst elements. Now, the vicarious trauma, we have all experienced that, at least in COVID-19 experience. It is the occupational challenges that people who support other people or volunteers who work with victims of natural disasters, now the earthquake in Turkey, or migrants, etc., or even they belong and they offer their services in very special groups like prisons, mental homes, severely disturbed children, etc. And what I have seen is that some of these people may decide not to have any children, because why should we bring children to a world that suffers so badly? Then with the technological advances today, we have more issues to see what is going on. We have artificial gametes, IVF, whatever the kind, which comes to be, tends to be an obsolete thing, because there are more contemporary tendencies: cryonics, cryothanasia, cryosuspension of pregnancy, CRISPR, Cas9, genetic manipulation, transhumanism, ectogenesis. We have the cultivation of embryo or fetuses to serve as saviors for other siblings. A lot of ethical considerations here to take into account. For example, you see in the pictures the lamb that is gestated out of a womb, and they have already started promoting the idea of ectogenesis in the media. We have in vitro gametogenesis, which means that you can become pregnant with a wholly biological child of yours when you are medically infertile, but this means that there will be a lot of manipulation on the gametes before they are implanted. And you have heard of the incident of His Yang-Kui, the Japanese scientist, who back in 2018 presented in a conference the findings, not the findings, the announcement. He made the announcement of IVF embryos, which he had done some genetic manipulation on them, then implanted them into a woman's uterus, and later twin girls were born, with another third girl that followed the next year. There was a lot of disturbance at the Congress. His Yang-Kui was arrested, was put to prison for 3 years, and he's released now, but the situation is there and the technology is there. Today, DNA editing is something that even first-year students can easily do without knowing, however, what the results will be for the many generations to come. Now, speaking about the collective trauma, we see that the collective trauma is connected with the existential identity because it shatters the basic fabric of society, and it creates this traumatization, elevates existential threat, prompts a search for meaning, and it affects the transgenerational collective self. It is not just individual memory, but it becomes memory shared by all. And it can be found in the collective narratives, in the collective emotions, in the collective models, mental models, values, etc. Most of the times, it is associated with the stigmatization and this humiliation. We have seen it in so many cases throughout history. It changes the collective trauma, changes the ways we think, we feel, and we act. So here are some examples. War, occupation, military conflicts, terrorist attacks, pandemics, recessions and depressions, genocide, religious persecution, racial trauma, misogyny, apartheid, class-based violence, mass killings, hurricanes, earthquakes, and other natural disasters. You can see how this affects our psyche, psychological distress, anxiety disorder, low self-esteem, existential crisis, xenophobia, generational trauma, transgenerational trauma, distrust, violence, chronic stress, and disease. To culminate into the historical trauma, which is an intertransgenerational trauma experienced by a specific cultural group that has a history of being systematically oppressed. The Holocaust, the indigenous people in Australia, in Africa, etc., immigrant refugees, all of these people are in for historical trauma. The intergenerational trauma, now to make it a little bit of clarification, refers to the trauma that causes epigenetic changes that occur due to a direct exposure to an environmental stressor, direct exposure, while the transgenerational is the trauma experienced as an exposure indirectly because it affects the gametes. For example, you can see it here. Suppose that generation F0 mother is affected by a trauma, whatever, then all of this information goes to the fetus. We know that the fetus, if it's a girl, up to the 4th month of gestation has got all the ova she's going to use in her life. So it affects the generation F1 and F2 directly. Then F1, F2 generation will be the intergenerational inheritance and will transmit the trauma to F3 generation. While from the part of the father, because the father, let's say father 0 generation, all of this information will go to the sperm, and the child that will come out of this father will be exposed directly, so that will be the intergenerational inheritance, and it will be transmitted to generations F2 and F3 as a transgenerational inheritance, which means that all of this, warfare, discrimination, revenge, cleansing, etc., all of this affects the present people, the present generation children, the children in the womb, and the generations afterwards. So, okay, going to the ecological systems theory, we can say that we have the classification of the traumas, with the historical trauma being in the chronosystem, collective trauma in the macro system, and you can see all the other systems which are connected with the ecological theory. Now, who is affected now? As you can understand, all people are affected. The prenate, the born child, the parents, the extended family, included the born siblings, and of course, the society. So, speaking about the stress impact on the prenate, the degree of traumatization, the psychoemotional state, our perception of ourselves, others, and the environment, the kinds of life strategies and tactics that we choose, and the relationships we form are all influenced by how we interpret the lived experience. Our health and the quality of life we ultimately have depends on the decisions we make based on our interpretations. So depending on how much intelligence there is in the system, the interpretations may be positive, creative, or toxic and destructive. Now, focusing on the maternal stress, well, as we will see, there is a lot of impact that the mother's stress may have on the children. And we'll start with the fetal brain. You know that when we start in the very early stages of our creation, the most cerebral cortexes consist of 6 layers, and the development of the brain starts with the deepest layer, then going on to the next and the next, more superficial. During the time of migration, if there is a very stressful experience for the mother, then this will create a kind of chaos in the life of, in the experience of in the intrauterine organism, and something like a traffic jam. Then the migrating cells that follow and have to go or use the cortical ladder may not be able to do it properly, and this will result into miswiring brain, which will have very bad effects later on. The cerebellum is also affected. We know that the cerebellum is not only responsible for the movement, but it also examines the thoughts of the organism, smoothens, corrects, refines them. So what happens if there is a stressful experience in the environment? Well, the stress inhibits the production of oxytocin. So we know what oxytocin does, and at the same time it increases the production of vasopressin, which is associated with more violent and hostile behaviors. As a result, the prenate or the infant later on does not benefit from the combination of a reduction in oxytocin and an increase in vasopressin, and as a result, males tend to become feminized, females tend to become masculinized. Then the inhibition of the prefrontal cortex, it leads to instinctive responses over more sophisticated intellectual activities, which means the decisions we make do not have that much intelligence. And certainly we have seen that stressful events associated with the cerebellum may increase congenital deformity, are associated with a cleft lip, cleft palate, spina bifida, and unfortunately, we also have the findings that associate this with schizophrenia and heavy psychopathology. Then another kind of stress from the part of the mother is the viral infection or psychological stress, malnutrition, the prenatal maternal immune activation in the very early stages, which all are associated with behavioral abnormalities in the exposed offspring, associated with, especially if they happen in the first trimester, with schizophrenia, psychosis, but also sensory motor gating, information processing, cognition, social function, etc. So the offspring later on present brain patterns and sensitivities which are not of the best, healthiest quality. We also know that the maternal stress is associated with loss of neurons and synapses, and that the influence this stress has on the hippocampus and the amygdala is connected with our memory, which in such cases becomes dysfunctional. And it also affects our internal states, for example, sleep and eating. It decreases the capacity to learn. We have fewer dendrites, and also the corticosteroid receptors in the brain are decreased, which means that the child becomes sensitive to stress and harder to cope with it. The serotonin levels fall. As a result, we have a tendency to depression. We also have a problem, an influence of just a moment, an influence of the brain weight, which diminishes the autonomic nervous systems, also becomes overcharged. This means that we become nervous, irritable later on, and we develop personality traits that make relationships not that easy. And certainly it is associated with stress. The stress is associated with immune and inflammatory responses, maybe associated with autoimmune challenges. And finally, it hastens the death of cerebellar neurons. We can see here, whenever you have the time, how these charts show. What could be the psychological distress? It could be anything, but some of the biggest ones are loss and bereavement, rejection of the pregnancy or not wanting it exactly at that time, a natural disaster, war, acts of violence. And these strong experiences have been associated in the worst scenarios for the children born. You see here about the viral infection, and besides all the other kinds of viruses that were known, and now we had the COVID-19 virus. All viruses have been connected with a bad impact on the prenatal and later on, because it affects the fetal brain development, it affects the immune system. You can see in the picture how this happens. The theme of the malnutrition, or what we call the mismatch concept and the thrifty hypothesis, has also been sufficiently researched. The Dutch famine is a good example of a mismatch concept, while the Leningrad seeds is an example of match concept, if we could say that. The mismatch concept is when the intrauterine environment does not match well or at all with the extrauterine environment. And of course, these experiments, this research was done during the Dutch famine in the Second World War, which was followed by an experience of abundance after birth, after the Second World War. While in the Leningrad seeds, the intrauterine environment and the extrauterine environment did not have many differences. But it does not restrict to only this malnutrition experience, because it affects everything else. All mismatches, the intrauterine and the extrauterine environments do not match or match. So the problems, most of the problems arise when there is a mismatch. Because then the organism has developed mechanisms to adapt to the intrauterine environment, but then continues to use the same strategies and behaviors, but the environment is different, so there is kind of problem here. Now we have a lot of evidence about the connection of cancer and prenatal experience, and there are a lot of papers now published connecting the cancer with the implantation period. You see, the implantation period is a very significant moment in our life, as if the placenta fails to protect the fetus against the embryo or pre-embryonic stage against the maternal immunity due to incompatibility, not only rhesus factor incompatibility, a more general incompatibility, then in these cases, the cells present the same behavior as the one which we notice in cancer. Now we know that all malignancies have a prenatal origin, whether they develop from an embryonal cell directly or from a more developed the prenatal cell that has developed the pathological traits which aid in postnatal survival. We have examined and we know which groups of mothers also have are more threatened by breast cancer or a malignancy like that, malignant tumors like that. You can see them here. Dizygotic pregnancies, macrosomic births, etc. So, in the fetal origins of adult disease, we also have seen that there is a number of diseases which are connected with prenatal experience. And this is diabetes, obesity, dyslipidemia, hypertension, coronary artery disease, stroke, kidney failures, liver failures, lung abnormalities, immune dysfunction, reduced bone mass, Alzheimer, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and cancer. You will see here, this is another interesting slide for you to look at. And here we see a lot of evidences now published about preterm birth and later health. And you can see that it is associated with so many different health issues. And although we have done something towards the maternal stress, we haven't done enough about the father stress, the paternal stress. And it is surprising that what we believed that did not matter that much seems to be very much important. The birth of a new human being does not depend only on the maternal stress or on the mother, and it's not the mother's issue. It is associated with the paternal stress as well, and it is a parental issue. Think of what is going on with all of these fathers that survived the Holocaust or all of these traumata that I mentioned at the beginning of this session. What else we know now is that the paternal stress affects mothers and then it becomes maternal stress. That alcohol, cocaine, cigarette use during pregnancy, passive or active, can affect the child's ability to grow structurally and functionally, which frequently results in physical or mental disabilities. How many fathers do not make use of all of this? Then the father's obesity can affect the fetal growth parameters and the placental development, which can impact pregnancy outcomes, and then the impact is on the baby in gestation, then born. We also know we have research data about the sick sperm hypothesis, which suggests that stress exposure can alter sperm maturation or motility, and that offspring development may be affected by the integrity of fertilization or pre-implantation events. Then all of this environmental information, neuroanatomical, behavioral, epigenetic, whatever it is, can be inherited transgenerationally or intergenerationally, as we have shown. So this means that parents not only transmit the behavioral cues about for example, fear and anxiety to their children, but also alter the brain chemistry, known as a transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. So can you imagine now a father who has phobias, mental problems, fears, has survived a war or has been involved in that? What will happen to the offsprings? Unfortunately, we are still involved in wars and conflicts. Then we also have research data about the offspring of defeated fathers who show greater levels of several depressive and anxiety-like behaviors, both in males and females, and that men's sperm quality and fertility has been reported to be negatively correlated with low levels of these factors in cases of stress, and also that the behavioral and metabolic symptomatology can manifest in the next at least 2 generations. So let's look at our parents and do something really serious about the health of the males. Another thing is the telomeres we have studied. And you know, the telomeres are the endings of a chromosome. And you know that at each time a cell divides, the telomere loses a small amount of DNA and becomes shorter. So over time, this is getting smaller and smaller, and finally the cell dies. What have we seen from the research on stress and the telomeres? That telomeres get shorter when witnessing violence, and the ages 5 to 15 children have a higher likelihood of experiencing cellular aging. And it is the telomere length is reduced by roughly 16% as a result of father loss between the ages of 9 and birth. The impact is greater for children whose fathers pass away. And we see that the telomere in early life is the main determinant of inter-individual differences in telomere throughout the human life course. So it is associated with longevity, age-related disease, etc. Newborns with reduced telomere already exhibit more DNA damage than those with longer telomere. Now, what happens with this pre-perinatal developmental plasticity? We know that there are specific times or stages in an organism during the development which are more sensitive to the environment or more plastic. And this may mean that the same event may not be received and may not have the same impact on all organisms that are exposed to it. A single genotype can result in many phenotypes when certain intrauterine events are present. So what we have seen is that there is a process that looks like this. There is an event that happens. This causes a sensation or an emotion, which is followed by an evaluation, a mental evaluation, and there is a conclusion that comes out, and then the individual, depending on this process, makes either self-judgments or judgments of the world and life based on that, and makes decisions that later on become their future reality. What are these very sensitive times? It is preconception, the accumulation of all existing traumata, stress in the air, abortion or abortions that have already happened or miscarriages, infertility issues or some fertility, and with whatever experiences are associated with therapies, failed IVF, stillbirth, loss of a child or loss in general, interventions, toxicity, and then in conception IVF, frozen egg, frozen sperm, unwanted IVF or conception, but made to do that, rape. During pregnancy, we have the implantation, the rejection, the experience of rejection, loss, forced abortion survival or abortion survival, twin or sibling loss, placental abruption, medical interventions, and stress, which can happen during pregnancy, and the earlier, the worse. And at birth, we have prematurity, holding back, medical interventions, including cesarean section, NICU experience, life-threatening or emergency situations, toxicity, stress in the air. And after birth, we have the postpartum depression, maternal dissociation, breastfeeding rejection, neglect, abuse, or abandonment, medical interventions, including surgeries on the newborn, death, and the loss in general. Speaking about the C-section trauma, there are specific traumatization factors which can be seen in this list and can be read more in the paper in your handouts. Obstetrical interventions or cephalopelvic propulsion, which is associated with claustrophobia and panic attacks, interruption of the process, the boundary intrusion, the section dislodging, the section lifting, separation and abandonment, and the parental stress. All of this contributes to the trauma. And there are somatic and psychological symptoms. Among the somatic symptoms, we have an increase in stress hormones in newborn and physiological reactivity. The child cries more often and longer. It presents contact difficulties, breastfeeding challenges, and shows regressive patterns, while among the psychological symptoms, the child presents grounding difficulties, has issues to relax, difficulties with the time management, has an attitude that has no rights, has to follow the decisions made by others. Because there is anesthesia involved, then what we see is that this is retriggered later on, and at critical moments when you need clarity, you go back and you numb, and you experience kind of paralysis. Then there is a misconception that I cannot fulfill my personal goals. There is loss of trust, powerlessness, and loss of autonomy. And then there are issues with the perinatal bonding, fear entrapment, and then the child who grows up, we see that causes behaviors, or that he creates or she creates problematic environments or situations, and asks or seeks support in order to escape. I have some cases here from my clinical diary. And in case I will speak about the two shorter ones. In case 3, we have this short narrative. The person is suicidal, and the person says, among many other things, my mom feels I am a burden and a problem in her life. I will try hard to die. I'll try with mania to die, because in this way they may feel sorry, and I will take my revenge. I will have punished them. Their crime was that they did not want me. So you see, this death decision was taken in the very early stages before the person is born. And in the other case, 18 minutes before the person is born, describes this person is a lady about 50 years of age when in the clinic, and she had developed ovarian cancer at 16, hysterectomy at 18, and a lot of behavioral challenges. It is suffocating in here with continuous backward and forward and confusing messages from the body of my mom. On the one hand, it is time for you to be born, and on the other hand, I constrict, I keep you tied to prevent the process and not die because of the pain that will come due to the torn apart flesh. She feels scared. It is the fear of the mother's death when the baby gets born. There is a moment that a push comes and it tears the flesh apart and the baby gets out. These are the messages. You get out by tearing the flesh apart. And I want to leave. Thanks God, I escaped my own death. I will always have to fight by myself, all alone, to keep death far from me and survive. Exactly like the time when I was in my mother's womb and things were so confusing there. There are more cases. Now, can we do anything to heal? You can see here in the image the birth mask. Looking at the face of a newborn, we can see all the trauma that has been, this baby has been exposed to. We need to do work on the body, on the cellular level, and prenatal psychotherapy, and on the psychomental level, cleansing the impact of trauma, starting with the generation now living, which is grandparents, and on the collective level, learning from our history, restore the broken trust, establish peaceful collaboration, respectful coexistence, because our past determines our present and the trends for our future. And it is not enough to have an individual healing support service, but it has to be done in among school children at schools, adolescents, young adults, families, mature adults, everybody from the moment of birth later on. So finishing, human health starts preconception, maternal and paternal stress impact the future generations. Psychotherapeutic work needs to integrate the analysis of all traumata. Professionals need to integrate the pre-perinatal human experience in their practices. Health professionals need better and wider academic and professional education embracing this. We need new policies. We need to take action to heal global stress. And of course, more research needs to be done. So thank you very much for your attention, and excuse the speed of my talk. So thank you. There are some minutes left. So if there is any question, I will be very happy to receive the questions.
Yes, please. Thank you. Well, did you hear the applause from the group?
No. Okay.
Yeah. So there's
I'm very sorry for my speaking so fast. I just wanted to bring to your attention as much as possible, just to awaken how much pain is involved in the prenatal stage of our life.
Yes, I can imagine you, and I think you are giving quite an agenda for research, I believe. So there are some minutes left for questions or comments. So, from the group here, or also from the participants online. So who wants to go first? And we have a microphone here. So from the online group. Let's see, you can raise your hands. Or speak out. Yes, there's a question coming up, Olga.
Hi, Olga, it's Julika. Can you hear me?
Hi, Julika.
Hi, how are you? Sorry, thank you so much for your presentation. I think it was there was so much in it. And I feel it can be so overwhelming at times. So I really like that at the end you kind of focused on the salutogenic approach of how things may be kind of evened out. Because I think always the danger with our research is that, we're adding to the stress of the mothers. I mean, if people would actually talk about this all the time, that is just, some situations are obviously out of control of people, and then that could just add stress to themselves and possibly the fetus and the development. So I think, I don't know what your opinion is, but I just feel like it's really important to focus on that last bit, maybe, and maybe the question is how we can do that.
Yeah, so if we all know that, are people still daring to have children? Is that your question? Suppose so. So Olga, what is your reflection on?
Yes, First of all, it is true that we see that there are more and more couples or adults who say it is a conscious decision of theirs to abstain from parenthood. Personally, I do not believe that it is a conscious decision. Of course, I respect their attitude, but I think that it is the result of whatever stress has already been in their personal experience. Second, we are here sharing all of these things as researchers and as professionals. What we do is one thing, trying to know what is happening so that we design and offer services which will support the populations. What we do with our pregnant couples, adolescent children, etc., is to help them reconstruct the distorted perceptions about themselves and life, cosmos, society, etc. So certainly salutogenic services are the services that we need to design for all. What I would like to bring our attention from my experience with group therapy, including pregnant couples, which usually are done, and this is a tendency now, by peer groups. That's a big question we could talk later on or another time. But what happens in this, every or some women or fathers bring their discouraging, disrespectful experience, their trauma to their discussion. But what happens when this touches the woman beside or the person beside in general? The person is exposed to the trauma, anger, hatred, whatever pain is involved, and we have to be very careful when we lead the pregnant couple groups or antenatal groups, because we need to make sure that what the women do is being deprogrammed by the condition that has been valid for centuries, that death and pain is the only correlation with labor and pregnancy. There is so much work to be done, but we have to be very careful. We here and in training, professional training or academic settings, we need to know realities. What we do when we support the citizens is a completely different thing.
Okay, thank you for your reflection. Also, I see in the chat a very nice comment by Dangira. Dangira, would you mind restating this to the group? They can't see the chat, but perhaps you want to repeat your comment.
Hello for all of you. Dear Olga, thank you for the great presentation. And I wrote on our chart that a very important message from you is that the child's development is affected not only by the state of the mother. We need to see by father's behaviors and health. It's very important for this. Because the father's perspective is, I think it's a huge course for children's development. Thank you, dear Olga.
Thank you.
Yes, and I see also Natalia is also agreeing with it being important to include father's perspective. I was reminded, Olga, during your talk about a news report from last week from Ukraine, where men who were being from young couples who were being drafted and sent to fight as soldiers were freezing their sperm. So they went to fertility clinics to freeze the sperm, obviously because they were not sure to make it back alive, and the couple still wanted to have children. But as you were talking about the possibility that the experiences of war may also have generational effects. It may even be speculated that well, perhaps if they do make it back alive from the front, you could think about whether the pre-war sperm may in fact have some advantages over their post-war sperm. But of course that needs to be tested out.
If I may add something to your comment, Carlo, is that the moment that the war was declared and started, all this fear trauma is on his sperm. So that will carry on. The thing is that we have many cases, especially now from women, more than men, who wanted to or need to go into surgery for cancer or other serious diseases, and they freeze their ova to use after the treatment, but the ova already have got all of the cancerous information. So what are we doing? And now there is a very important thing which we need to look at. We have spent many decades on conflicts between obstetricians, the medical people, and midwives and women, etc. And that's not the only enemy, if they are enemies, which I do not personally think they are. But it is, there are so many things that are happening now that we are going to look ridiculous after some years, when there will be no mothers to gestate, to give birth to children, when there will be no parents to raise their children, because there will be artificial intelligence, there will be no midwives, because they already have midwives robots and nurses robots, artificial intelligence, and perhaps we do not give birth at all to human beings, but organisms, humanoids, metahumans, whatever they are called, will be just cultivated in technological booths. So that's very serious, I think.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think this is all we have time for now, but lots of food for thought and discussion, and perhaps also the journal club session that we are going to have now will also include some of these important ideas. So I want to thank you, Olga, very much for your wide-ranging research presentation, and also want to point your attention to the handouts that you prepared and are available through the OSF Learning Hub, so you can already start to access those and read those. Also, thank you for preparing these handouts and these